Rob. Hey, we got another one of our presidents here. Rob is from the Princeton Association of New York City, which I think you call Panic.
Yes.
And another of our hosts. Rob, anything you'd like to add?
No, I just want, first of all, I want to thank Lisa for doing such a great job in organizing this and pulling this together, first of all. And second of all, I want to thank all of you for coming. We've had a series over the last year and a half. Initially, Northern California, Boston, which has an equally bad acronym of PAIN, Princeton Association of England, and PANIC in New York. And it's been wonderful to connect and see people coast to coast and bring together tigers and great wine. And we're so happy, Lisa, that you're with us and you've organized this, and we have the benefit of all of your experience, expertise. So thank you for pulling us all together.
Well, thanks for giving us a chance. It's a lot of fun for us in Hilton Head to see you from all around the country. We got a lot of tigers here tonight. And I see some more people have come on. Here's Raquel. Raquel is from the Princeton Club of New England. She's the president. Maybe she'd like to say something also to the group.
I'm having mic issues, I think.
No, you're not.
Raquel, you sound fine.
Oh.
Good.
My computer's telling me. That was a good thing I wasn't, I don't know, saying anything inappropriate, because I fully thought you guys couldn't hear me. But hi, everyone. It's so great to see you all. Oh, we already have commentary, and we love that. We love an active Zoom. Thanks everyone so much for joining us. I think this is, it's so exciting to sort of be experiencing the life that this, hold on, I have this like massive plate of cheese and crackers in front of me that I need to move to make way for my lunch. It's been really exciting to see the life that this sort of series of Tigers in Wine has taken on. It really just sort of keeps going and draws in new people and new interests and new regions every time. And this is a particularly fun one too, because we've featured a number of Princeton winemakers in the past, but of course there's more to the wine world than just the people who make it. Tonight we get to feature someone who is a sommelier and also a Tiger. So I'm so excited to hear what Lisa has to share with us. I love Italian wines, are really like near and dear to my heart. So this is going to be a treat. Thank you all so much for joining us.
So I can see a lot more people signed on, and it looks like there are two screens. Let me say hi to Michael Breidenbach. Michael and his wife Janice they're listed as Hilton Head, but I think they've got the Princeton Club of Ave Maria, Florida underway down there.
Super honored.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead with Don and me. Yeah. And I think Michael took WSET too, didn't you? He took one of these Wine and Spirits Education Trust courses. So Michael's got a lot of expertise as well tonight.
Yes, and thanks to both of you for the invitation. It was a pleasure to take that course in Philadelphia and complete it online because of the lockdown. But really looking forward to these wines tonight. Thank you.
So I see Risa too, by the way. Hi, Risa. So glad you're with us.
Thank you.
Okay. So Cindy, how are we doing with sign-ins? I have 5 after 8, so it's probably a good time to get started.
Yeah, we've got 39 people on the call, so I think it's a good place to start, and hopefully a few more will join us in the next little while.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight for the program, The Best Wines from the Best Somms. We have people from, as I've mentioned before, from 8 states. We are expecting about 50 altogether once everybody's signed in. So it's a fun and big turnout. And I'm hoping that you really enjoy the wines. Now, there is a very special tradition that we observe in Hilton Head, and we open every meeting with it. We had here in Hilton Head, Pete Cannan, who was the cane bearer 2 times. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, cane bearer twice at the P-Raid. And our founding club president, Scott Foster, was so excited about that and so happy about it. He thought we should start that tradition here. So we have a cane of our own. Oh, Don, would you mind trying to hand it to me? I put it out of reach, sorry. It's a beautiful ebony cane with a silver carved tiger head. And even more excitingly, it has a very special case. It was created by Bill Barrett from the great class of '66. Can you hand me the case, Tom? Let's show that. And it says on the front, it says in praise of Old Nassau. I'm going to try, my camera doesn't always cooperate. Let's see if you can maybe get a little, I don't know why it does this, but anyway, we get an idea of this beautiful wooden case carved with maple. Now, here's the cane, which I'm also trying to convince to show itself with the great silver head. So this cane is awarded to the oldest member of the oldest class who's attending the meeting. And today we have Don Dwight from the great class of 53. And here he is. Look, he's already got the cane in hand. So
I've unmuted you if you want to.
So Don, would you like to say anything today? I saw you and Nancy signed in a few minutes ago.
It is, well, I would spend a lot of time complimenting you and what you do for Princeton and all of us who love the place. Second, I do savor, I just really treasure the chance to carry that walking stick, that cane, and recognizing that I am 90 years old, I have plans to carry it for a long time.
Oh, well, that will disappoint Lynn because I know you're only a few months older than he is, also from the great class.
Sorry,
Okay. But that's great. And we want to see you carrying that cane for a very long time as well. Okay, thank you. Now that we've got our very most important business handled, let's start the program. Tonight, we are going to taste wines that were selected by some of the best sommeliers in the world. There's a club in London called 67 Pall Mall, and they have put together not only the head of the Master Sommelier, the Court of Master Sommeliers in the UK, but a wonderful team of sommeliers who were voted best in London, which I think is quite an honor. And we looked through their wine list and made some selections from the list. They actually took over an old bank. And if you've been on Pall Mall, it's close to St. James Palace. So it's the end of Pall Mall closest to St. James Palace. And it's a beautiful old building that they've repurposed. And one of the things they repurposed was the bank's vault, which holds their 26,000 bottle wine collection. So we're only getting a tiny taste of the wines you can enjoy there. If you go to London, even if you don't want to join the club, if you have an American Express Platinum card, you are able to call ahead and get a reservation and enjoy the club. So I urge you to consider that when we're all feeling comfortable traveling again. If you like wine, you'd really enjoy it. Okay. So tonight, we have selected 3 wines from Italy, and they're very special wines, but Italy itself is a really interesting wine country. It's the largest wine producer in the world. It exports more, but also just makes more wine than anyone. And the tradition of winemaking in Italy goes back to the 8th century for the Phoenicians. The Greeks came along, they augmented it. And of course, everyone knows that the Romans marched all over Europe and took their winemaking with them. Don and I actually visited in Austria a Roman cellar that was 2,000 years old. So it's just Italy's influence on all of Europe and also on all the world is very important. And one of the things that's really interesting when you have such a long tradition is that they have so many different grapes. There are over 2,000 identified indigenous grapes in Italy. Now, they don't regularly make wine with all of them. They regularly use maybe 350 to 400, but it's a very special location because of that. Now, there was a time period, especially after the Second World War, when Italy turned some of its attention to growing what we call international varieties. That would be wines like Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay, wines that came primarily from France. But in the last number of years, there's been a real renaissance there. And now a lot of smaller producers, families, artisanal producers are looking at these indigenous grapes and working to create very special, very high quality wines. And these wines have caught the attention of people all around the world. And as we already know, some of the best sommeliers. So that's what we're turning to. Tonight, we're going going to taste Pietro Rizzo from Tornatore, which is a white wine made primarily from a grape called Caricante. And we will also taste two Nebbiolos. They're from the Piedmont. The Pietro Rizzo is from Sicily, and we'll go to the northeast of Italy for these very special red wines. But what I'd like to do is maybe turn to the Pietro Rizzo. Does everyone have their wine open, I hope? So let me tell you a little bit about it. And if you have questions, please feel free to ask. This is a very savory tasting wine. It won't remind you of wines like Chardonnay, which usually tastes more like fruit. And I think it's actually a pretty good example of an Italian wine. They tend to have more savory flavors. They have salinity sometimes. They have herbal flavors. Lemon is not uncommon in them also, but they don't have a tropical fruit flavor. Like a Chardonnay from California might remind you of fruits like pineapple or peaches. That's not what's happening with this wine. So I just wonder if anybody tasted it yet. What do you think? Is it something new that you haven't tried before? And if so, what do you think of that?
People
Maybe
might have
nobody.
to, no, people might have to unmute themselves if they want to comment.
Okay. Oh, Cindy muted everybody. So you just have to look at the bottom of your screen on the left side and unmute if you want to comment. And if nobody wants to go first.
We cheated. We'll go first. We cheated. We had it with dinner. We couldn't wait till later.
Margie.
And I must say, we're going to have to go to, what's the place that when we go to London for Wimbledon?
67 Pall Mall.
And he's got the American Express card.
That's right.
Yeah.
We're going there with a platinum card.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Stan and Margie, they would probably invite you in even without an American Express card if you're there during Wimbledon. I don't know if you can all see that Stan Smith and Margie Smith are joining us now. So that's great. So was that a new experience? Would it taste like other wines you've had before?
I'm not a connoisseur. I just really liked it.
Okay.
And I see about the lack of tropical fruit flavor. It is very pleasant. Enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's something kind of unusual about this wine. Not a lot of white wines are treated with wood. Chardonnay is, but it's relatively uncommon. But this wine was fermented in wood, and then it was aged in wood. And so I think that makes the wine feel very soft in your mouth and very full. Did anybody notice that?
We're back.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
I find it's very smooth, and I'm a Chardonnay drinker, and I love this. It's just very crisp and neat and not as fruity. I love it. It's wonderful.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that.
Hey, Don, did you think it tasted a bit buttery?
Which Don?
Drakeman.
Drakeman.
Oh, Don Drakeman.
Yeah. We're thinking it's very savory here in the Dwight House.
Yeah, I think this Don agrees with that, and that I also think it tastes very salty, and not in a bad way, but in that salinity that Lisa mentioned, which I seem to be sensitive to. So yeah, interesting set of savory, salty, minerally flavors.
I agree with the minerally. Like, to me, it tastes minerally as well, and soft.
You know, this wine the grapes are grown on Mount Etna, which is, as you know, on the island of Sicily, and they actually are planted very high up. So even though it's really warm there, they have time to mature their flavors because there are breezes and because of the elevation. And the producer has been there for hundreds of years, although this winery is not as old as the family, but it's part of their ancient vines and longstanding traditions, which is very special as well. The Tornatore family, which name. If you like this, you might like other Etna Biancos. There's on your handout. Did everybody get the handout? You can see some names at the bottom. Benante, Pietra Marina is one. But we also gave you the name of Tornatore Etna Rosso. So that's a red wine made from a grape called Barolo Mascalese. It's another one of these indigenous grapes. It's all very, very reasonably priced. And you may just think it is similar. It's it's savory and it's not a really heavy wine. It would go with a lot of different foods that you would try with red wine. So a couple of productions. Any other questions or comments on the white wine?
Yeah. One thing I noticed was that actually, after having been open for an hour, because I also enjoyed it during dinner, I liked it more a little bit later on.
I think this wine really opens up. I agree with that. We tried to put some notes. We did a lot of experiments to try to figure out what the right amount of time was. So I think it does help it if you open it up ahead of time. I actually like it when it warms up a little too. If it's been in the fridge and you let it warm up.
Yeah,
I
think agree.
It tastes like licorice a little bit to me now on the roof of my mouth, or fennel, you might say. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Would you like to turn to the Piedmont now? We've got two wonderful red wines. Let's start with the Piedmont itself. It's in the northwestern part of Italy. It's called the Piedmont because it's at the foot of the Alps, excuse me, and the Apennines, which are a ridge of mountains that go right up the center of Italy, curve around so that they're also sheltering the Piedmont. So it's very hilly, but it's also sheltered in a way. And it's what we call a continental climate, which means it gets very warm in the summer, despite being so far north and near the mountains. And it's one of the reasons they can ripen grapes as well as they can, despite their location. Now, the Piedmont is known for really high quality wines. They export about 18% of all of Italy's wine, even though they only make 5% of it. And Barolo is really the king of all of those. I think a lot of people really respect Barolo and Nebbiolo generally. So we are actually going to taste two very complex, again, savory wines made from Nebbiolo. And Nebbiolo is a grape that's indigenous to Piedmont. It doesn't really grow very well other places. People have tried, but it's kind of a finicky grape. And it's very happy on its mountain hillsides. The fog comes in the morning and the cool air comes at night to help preserve the acidity. So anybody tasted it yet? What do you think? Someone must have tasted it with their dinner.
I am so loving this. These are all so smooth, and Lisa, gosh, I love it. It's just so complimentary. I had it with little cheese and crackers with dinner. Just lovely.
One of the nice things we discovered about Barolo is it pairs with so many things. And cheeses are great. We suggested a truffled cheese that was available from Whole Foods. Did anybody find that one, the clear milk? Because anything truffle is fabulous with Nebbiolo. Maybe not yet.
So I have. Of course, I cheated because I get to drink the rest of the bottle when the certified sommelier does the tasting. But I've got some of the clear milk Gouda with truffles in it, and I think it's just spectacular with these two reds. For some reason, truffles and these Nebbiolos are spectacular. Hopefully the Schultzes are finding the same thing with their pasta.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the difference between the two wines. The Occhetti is from the larger region called the Langhe, and these grapes come from the less favorite. Doesn't mean they're from bad sites, but they're not from the ideal sites that the Barolo goes on. The Barolo grows on the hillsides, typically kind of about halfway up the hill, where the sunlight is the strongest and where the cool air doesn't reach them because it rolls down the hill below them. And Nebbiolo takes a long time to ripen, so that's a great place for it to ripen. Now, what happens though is that on that hillside, the grapes get perfect growing conditions they become more complex and they develop more flavors over time. The grapes that are actually ripened in the greater Langhe area will ripen faster, and that actually takes away from some of the complexity. So those are grown on sandy soils, for example, where the soils get warm early and they are warm during the growing season, and the water drains away pretty fast and it takes a lot of nutrients with it. So that's why I say it's still a good location, but it's not as good as the Barolo location. So can you notice a difference? I think that the Barolo, it has more intense flavors. Anybody notice that between the two? Well, people are just opening wines. Okay, so let me just fill you in a little bit on them too. So there are a couple important things about the Barolo region, the area that's so famous. There are different soils between the east and the west and the central area. And in the eastern part of Barolo, the soils are harder and they produce wines that are more structured. And by structured, I mean they have more tannin and more acidity. And those wines typically take a little longer to mature and you have to wait longer to drink them. On the west side, around the towns of Barolo and La Mora, there's a little more sand in the soil, more limestone, and those wines tend to be ready to drink sooner. They're a little softer, the tannins are softer, and the flavors, I think, are delicate, but very evident, very complex. So the wine that we're drinking, the Barolo, is all grapes that come from the western side of the Barolo region. And even though it's a 2017 and most people say you need to wait quite a while to drink a Barolo, I think it's drinking beautifully with just a little time in a decanter. Now, the other thing that happened is that in 2017, they had what they called the Lucifer heat wave. It was unbearably hot. And that meant that the grapes really got ripe that year. So even a hard to ripen grape like Nebbiolo is very ripe. So that's another reason why that wine is probably drinking very well now. And someone has just written herbal notes. I think so, definitely. What kind of herbal notes are you noticing in particular? Just.
You want to say, Kelly?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I think I'm getting a slightly menthol, menthol and herbs, Provence, up the Provence, maybe a little bit.
Like Provence herbs, yeah. I also think there's a little bit of licorice in the flavor. If you focus on the top of your mouth, maybe after you swallow, that's where I taste licorice. Other people may taste it other places, but it's kind of a fennelly licorice flavor, which I actually really like in this wine. But all the flavors in Barolo, I think they're delicate. And it's kind of a learned experience trying to figure out how to name them, how to identify them. But it's kind of one of the fun things about wine tasting over.
It has a lot of that complexity. It's really neat. Is the other Nebbiolo coming across as like a softer finish? Like it just doesn't have the same brightness as the Barolo, but it also could be our bottles because they look like they were a bit damaged. So is the Nebbiolo coming across as bright to most people, or to you, Lisa?
Well, let's see if anybody else wants to comment on the differences, how they taste. Maybe people don't have, I'll have them open yet. I think that the Langhe Nebbiolo, which I absolutely love, the Occhetti, it would be great with everything. It's an $18 wine. Open it with your pizza, open it with your cheese, anything. I don't think it has, I think bright's a nice word because it doesn't have the kind of the intensity that the Barolo has. It's a little bit lighter tasting, but not in a bad way. It still has all the same flavors, but maybe a little lighter version of them. It's really actually an extremely well-made wine. We tasted so many Barolo and so many Nebbiolo, and Barbaresco trying to get ready for this event. And especially for the price, it's an incredible value. I would recommend that wine any day. I also think that Raddy is a really good winemaker. Remember, I just talked about the difference in the soils, more structured wines, meaning more tannin, more acidity, longer to open up in the east, and more delicate, more approachable wines in the west. It's not just the soil though. Has anybody ever seen the movie The Barolo Boys? It's a movie about the winemakers in the Piedmont and starting in the 80s and 90s. Well, if you look back in time, there was a way of making wine, we'll call it the traditional way, in Barolo that involved macerating the grapes and the wine for a very long time. So the grapes and the skins would stay in the wine for up to 30 days, maybe even longer. They would just keep trying to get everything they could out of the grape skins. And then when they finished that, they would take that wine and they would put it in a huge, called a body, a huge kind of aging vessel, and leave that there for a long time too. And this resulted in wines with a lot of tannin and a lot of what we call extract. A lot came out of the skins. So these were heavy wines that took a long years and years, 10 years or more to approach. So starting again in around the 80s, some people started looking at more modern winemaking practices, particularly as they were conducted in Burgundy, because everyone wanted to be Burgundy. Burgundy was so popular with wine drinkers. Someone from, I think there's a great line in the Barolo Boys, the man drove into Burgundy and he looked around and he's driving a really old, small car. And he sees all these nice cars and everybody looks prosperous. And he decided maybe they weren't doing things right in the Piedmont. So that started a movement. There were other things too, to try to focus on what we call more modern winemaking. So instead of a 30-day fermentation, they went 7 to 10 days. And some of them decided to try small oak barrels like they use in Burgundy. Those are about 225 liters. The body is either 2,500 or 5,000 liters. So they wanted to see if oak influence and also maybe more air that would get to the wine would make a difference. And of course, this launched a big war between the traditionalists and the modernists. Now, there are still people who are very traditional and also others who are very modern, but there's kind of a middle ground that I think Radicchio occupies. So Radicchio does a modernist approach. It does a 7 to 10 day fermentation, and he uses stainless steel fermenters where he can control the temperature, which means he can really control what's extracted from the grapes. Then he moves, instead of to the small oak barrels, he moves to the body. He either uses the 2,500 liter or the 5,000 liter. And the reason he does that is that, remember we talked about how delicate these flavors are? I think they are. I love them. And part of what I love is the delicacy. But if you put this wine to age in a small oak container, especially if it's new oak, then a lot of flavor will affect the wine. You've probably all tasted, let's say, Cabernet Sauvignons made with oak, and their extra tannin comes from the oak, and also flavors like cloves or cinnamon or vanilla. So new flavors come in. And this sort of compromise position where they use the large oak means that you don't dilute or overpower the really lovely, delicate flavors that come with this grape. So I think it's actually a perfect compromise, and I love the delicacy of these wines and the fact that you can perceive so many different flavors in them that are characteristic of Nebbiolo. I think we've had a couple of questions come up. Let's see, how many years post-vintage is ideal for opening typical Barolo? I want to enjoy them just the right time. So some of it's going to depend on where you bought them. Remember the talk about the East and the West and the traditionalists versus the modernists. So if you bought a wine from Giacomo Conterno, who is one of the strongest advocates of the traditional way, and who's also in the East, where there are more structured wines, you want to wait a minimum of 10 years, but I would say look online, look at reviews before you open one of those. We have found with these 2017s, which may have been available when you were in the Piedmont, if you decant them, and it will depend on, again, the winemaking, but if it's a little more modern winemaking, they're drinking beautifully right now, like the one we're having tonight. We suggested 45-minute decant or put it in a big glass and swirl it a lot for a while. And so those are ready. And I don't know what year you bought. You might have had access to some older wines when you were traveling. So they may maybe cutting closer. We taste a lot of older ones too. And we honestly think that we like them when they're younger and a little fresher. Volatile acidity is a hallmark of Barolo. And as they age, which is another way for saying acetic acid or a little bit of a vinegary or balsamico flavor. We didn't particularly like that in the older wines. So I like them when I can taste all the fresh flavors, the roses, the strawberries, the raspberries, the fennel. And Martinasco, which actually has some age on it, you might taste a little bit of what's called leather. That we call that a development flavor, something, a way the wine changes over time. So they're different. There's no perfect time to taste these wines. They will evolve, but you don't want to drink them too early because you won't enjoy them. The tannins will be too harsh.
Lisa?
Yeah.
I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about what creates the complexity as a grape matures.
Sure.
Is it soil or is it chemistry?
So actually, it starts in the vineyard. So if you think about what I said about how the grapes are they're on hillsides where they have good sunlight, but cool air at night. So we call that a diurnal change. And what happens is during the day, the grapes get warm, they start to develop their flavors. But if they ripen too fast, the flavors won't have time. So when the cool air comes down the hills at night, it slows the ripening process. So right away, you're starting to give the grape an extra possibility to develop its flavors. Now, some other things they do, as they use special, nowadays, more modern vine training methods. So they spread the grapevine out on a trellis of some kind to make sure that they're optimally ripening. And they do things like they selectively take leaves off or leave leaves on. If it's a really hot summer, they make sure the leaves stay on to shade the grapes. So there are a lot of things that are happening in the vineyard. Then when they get to the winery, they work on things as we've discussed. They do a fermentation that is not too long and not too short. And once the wine goes into a barrel to age, it starts to develop. So remember I said you might taste a little leather or maybe something earthy in the Barolo. Over time, the wine is alive. And so we have the combination of basically what happens in the vineyard, the work they do in the winery, and the aging period that come together to give the wine all of the flavors that you're experiencing tonight. The Barolo was aged for 3 years after it comes out of the barrels. And the Occhetti is aged for at least a year. So all those things are happening in all these wines. Are there other questions in the chat? I know Richard was going to help monitor that to see make sure I don't miss any.
Yeah, one question. I find the Petrorizzo very delicious, and I'm not a white wine. And I wonder how much sugar there is in these wines versus the traditional American white wines. I find that it's a lot more complex, less sweet, which I like. But do you know if there's as much sugar in those grapes as there are in the American?
You have hit on kind of a big secret about popular American wines. There are a lot of wines that are very readily available. Let's say Kendall Jackson Chardonnays. Anybody ever tried that? It's very delicious. It has lovely fruit flavors, but a lot of the American wines that you can buy, that are available to us, have what we call residual sugar. So it isn't just how ripe the grapes are, it's if you ferment them to dryness. And what's happening in the US is a lot of these wines are off dry. Kendall Jackson, the white yellowtail, apothic, I think they call it. That's very popular. All those wines have residual sugar. Americans say they don't like sweet wines, but they buy sweet wines. Now, a wine like Petrorizzo is fermented enough that it's fully dry. By dry, we mean, depending on the acidity level, it's probably got no more than 9 grams per liter of residual sugar. Probably not even that much. A high acid wine can have a little more residual sugar because the acid balances it. So you're absolutely right. These wines are dry. They're really very dry. And I think that makes it easier to appreciate their other flavors.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with Kendall Jackson Chardonnay. It's delicious.
Hey, Lisa, are you going to kick me out of the wine club for eating pizza with a wine?
No, I think pizza is absolutely perfect with the Occhetti and the Barolo. Couldn't be better.
Thank
What do you think?
It's working for me.
Yeah, it should.
So long as it's good pizza. Good pizza with good wine.
I mean, we gave you a lot of food suggestions, many of which are very easy to try. You could have a hamburger, you could cook a steak on the grill. Terry's Pizza is perfect. I said that to Dom when we first tasted Occhetti. I said, this is the perfect pizza wine. And the price is right too. It probably doesn't cost as much as a fancy pizza. Okay. Hey, here's a question. Does anybody have an interest maybe in hearing a little bit about wine tasting skills? Because the two red wines are a great chance to think about a wine tasting skill, which is identifying the amount of tannin and acidity. Both of those red wines have high tannins and high acidity. So if everybody takes a drink of their red wine, I would say pick the Barolo because it'll be even more obvious in that. Swish it around your mouth, especially over your gums in the front, because your gums are very sensitive. Oh. All right, now swallow it. Now somebody, maybe Donna, look at a timer. Does everybody notice their mouth is really watering a lot? And it will keep watering for at least 30 seconds, probably a little longer. So this is a high acid wine. Now that's part of what makes it so great with food, because it offsets any fats in food. That's why it's terrific, for example, with this pizza with the cheese and the meat on it. Now, the other thing, as time goes by, if you feel across the front of your gums, does anybody notice a tingling feeling or a drying feeling? So I at least saw somebody shake their head, yes.
Yes.
So the more that happens, the higher the tannins are, because they dry out your mouth. So if you're trying to calibrate, this is high acid and high tannin. Over the course of the next 20 or 30 seconds, the tingling that I feel in my gums will actually, it will increase. So while we wait for our gums to dry out, Rob's got a question about the difference between Brunello and Barolo. So first, let's tell you what Brunello is. Brunello di Montalcino is another Italian wine, but the grapes are grown in Tuscany, and the grapes are Sangiovese. But there's a special clone they grow in Brunello called Sangiovese Grosso. It's a little bigger grape. And they are a little bit further south than Chianti. Everybody's probably heard of Chianti. So it's a little bit warmer. And they do the same thing. They find the ideal hillside. They plant those grapes up a little bit higher where the sun will hit them very well. So in that case, in that respect, they're similar. However, they're both high acidity wines. They both have reasonable tannin levels. The flavors are very different. I think of Chiantis and wines made from Sangiovese like Brunello di Montalcino as having a dried flavor. So if you were to say that there's sour cherry in our Barolo, you'd say there's dried cherry in the Brunello. So they're very, very different. I also think the Barolo has more body. Probably the alcohol levels are a little bit higher in the Barolo. The Barolos tend to be up around 14% or so. So that's another difference. One thing that is very similar, if I'll hold my glass up, you can probably see it in your own. What does anybody notice about the color of this wine? How does it compare to other red wines that you've tasted? Is it darker or lighter?
Lighter.
It's a lot lighter.
Much.
And Sangiovese, despite all that tannin and all those flavors, everything that's in that wine, it's not very dark. The reason for that is that the grape skins don't have much that adds color. It's called anthocyanin. So there isn't much anthocyanin in those grape skins. And that's true about Sangiovese also. So they both have light colored. So if you were drinking them both side by side and someone asked you to tell them apart, you couldn't do it by color or acidity, maybe by alcohol level, but it's not everybody's good at the minute differences in telling alcohol apart. But I think the big tell is that the Brunello will taste like dried herbs and dried cherries. And it has a very distinctive dried flavor. Dawn's coming over. Dawn, you have something to say. Oh, Dawn tells me there are questions in line. So Rob, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Lisa, that's very helpful, actually. Thank you very much.
Sure. Well, I have a great question here that the truffle pasta and 2 red wines work beautifully together. I hope as well as Terry's pizza. What is the most amazing, surprising, or your favorite wine and food pairing in existence? Uh-oh, Don, you want to do that one? Where did Don go? He's away from his phone. I'm going to make Don take that one.
I think the truffle pasta with the Barolo is pretty good.
Can you guys hear him? He says the truffle pasta with the Barolo. I think we've eaten that like 8 times. In the beginning, some of it was
So
okay.
good.
Did we need truffle
So
butter?
good.
Because we thought that's not very good for us. So we were trying to make it without truffle butter. So we tried a little bit of truffle butter. Then we tried no truffle butter. But once we honed in on the recipe, we just thought we would just continue. So yeah, that anything truffle with Barolo is just out of this world good. Yeah.
We had a dispute because I said, well, surely the truffle butter will work with the white wine, but it's with the red. It's amazing.
It's really good. We thought that the clear milk, though, was actually really good with the white wine. Also, that truffle cheese, we enjoyed that with the white wine too. So that was a good all-purpose tasting tonight. What else is in the comments, Don? Can you see them? I'm trying to get them open here.
So,
in the chat.
Lisa, we have a few.
Okay, thanks, Richard.
One is specifically about the Martinasco, is whether or not it's unfiltered or unfined based on the appearance and mouthfeel. Another is how these grapes differ from Chianti and those from southern Tuscany, specifically Montepulciano. And then can any of these wines be bought in South Carolina / in markets that are not New York or San Francisco?
Okay, so we found one of the ratty wines at Rollers the other day. We wanted to try a, I think it was a Dolcetto, right, Don? So we know that Gallo has a presence. Gallo, this is the Gallo portfolio, Lux Wines. They import these very special wines, and they are now building up their presence in South Carolina. So I think there's a chance of that. However, you could probably order from the Wine Chateau again. They may still have some wine in stock, or we tried wine.com and we didn't find all of them on wine.com, unfortunately. So you could try the internet, use Wine Searcher. You could ask Rollers, for example, if you're in Hilton Head, because they're very good and really super about making special orders. And if they can order them for you, they will. Okay, that's probably the best. Greg agrees, Rollers is great. They're lovely, and they have lots of cheeses and good tasting expertise over there too. Lots of other great wines. We did the Southern Tuscany comparison.
Mm-hmm.
Risa said she just found some on Vivino. So she's got the Vivino app and it told her where to buy it.
And there was a specific question about the Martinasco of whether it's unfiltered and or unfined based on the color and mouthfeel.
So the color is not because the light color isn't because it's been filtered or fined. I don't think I remember seeing anything in the winemaking saying it was unfiltered. Do you, Don? We tried to do a lot of research on these, so we have to assume that these wines were filtered. I mean, this wine is so clear and sparkling. It's hard to imagine that it wasn't at least fined. Finding most Americans and people in Europe too now like to see wines that are very clear and sparkling. They don't want to see them cloudy. So finding just means they use something that they put through the wine that collects any particles. It doesn't leave anything behind. It just gives you a nice, clear, sparkly wine. Filtering can sometimes take out components that you'd like. So when people say that a wine is unfiltered or unfined, what they're saying is they've tried to leave the substance of the wine in and they believe it adds something. So a lot of people think that's a really good thing, unfiltered and unfined. Okay.
Just a quick note from the internet.
Okay.
The Martinasco is actually filtered but not fined. It's Lisa's explanation is great. Sometimes people who are vegan are a little nervous about fining, which is sometimes done with eggs. And that requires more research than we learned in our tasting tests.
Actually, for Don or Lisa, the term fining may not be as familiar to some people. Could you explain it for the audience?
Sure. So imagine the wine, they're getting ready to bottle the wine, and it's been sitting in vats for a long time. And it's sitting in red wines or white. They sit on what they call their lees, which are after the yeast finishes its action, it stays in with the wine and it helps create new flavors in the wine. We call that autolysis. So when you get to the end of that process, you might say to yourself, I would like to remove some of that other material. So fining means that you'd put an agent in. Dawn mentioned eggs, but there are other things that people use. The wide variety, actually, it's probably a list of 10 or 12 things. And they just pass that through the wine and collect it. It's filtered out at the end. They use a filter. And it's really just to clean up the wine a little bit so that it meets the standard that they believe their customers would like to receive. Filtering is done a little differently. Maybe the whole wine is put through a filter and it's meant to collect things like excess tannins or excess lees.
We also have another question here from Mark Daniel about, since you were raving about the truffle pasta, whether the successful pairing of Barolo and truffle is largely due to the fact that they grow in the same area, they have the same terroir, and whether other Italian reds could also pair well with a truffle pasta or truffles in general.
Yeah, what grows together pairs together is a famous axiom in wine tasting and pairing. So there seems to be no question that those truffles up in the Piedmont and the wines really belong together. And of course, they've been making the wines for a very long time, and they've been growing or finding the truffles for a long time. So I think that's true. We thought that the truffle cheese was really good with the Pietruzzo. So I think you could experiment a little and see what you like. And so I think it's entirely possible. I mean, truffles would be great with, say, the super Tuscans that are based on the Bordeaux style grapes like Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot. I think most people would enjoy those together. And was that the whole question, Richard? Did I miss any part of it?
No, that was the whole question. We have another one here, which is very Princeton specific, courtesy of Rob Walt from Panic. Can you tell us more about what orange wine is?
Okay. It sounds like something you might want at Princeton, but it really depends on your taste. Everybody heard the term orange wine? I'll define it. Orange wines are wines made from white grapes that have been exposed to air. We call that oxidized. And then they develop some color because of that. They start to develop. If you get an old bottle of white wine, you'll see it. You'll see your own version of an orange wine. But they tend to be made, for example, up in the northeastern corner of Italy, where it goes into, I think it's Slovenia, right across the border there. That's sort of a famous area known for orange wines, although not the only one. Think of sherry. Think of the flavors of sherry. Acetaldehyde. Ever had an aged sherry? So that orange wines will probably remind you of those kinds of flavors. If you like that, then add it to your Princeton wine list. Although they're not the orange, or not the deep orange we're wearing tonight. They're more of a transparent one. Okay.
Then we have a couple questions related to either varietals or producers. One is there an unusual, underrated, or lesser known varietal that you think everybody should try? And then are there wineries, are there Italian wineries that export to the US that you specifically like or trust? This is from Tim Livingston, who was raving about the Ratti, also Los Pio Cesare, but is very new to Italian wine. So would love to know about other recommendations for Italian wines.
Okay. So let's go back one in terms of unusual grapes. That's a really great question. We've mentioned the Etna Rosso, which is made with Nerello Mascalese. It's a similar weight to the Barolo, probably not as complex, but it's a slightly lighter wine. And if you like this wine, you'll probably like the Nerello Mascalese. Mostly it's 70% that in the Etna Rosso. If you're interested in the Piedmont, there's a grape called Ruche, R-U-C-H-E, and it comes from an area not too far from Barolo. This is a grape that almost dried out. At the turn of this century, there were just, I don't know, less than 100 acres left. And a priest in a local village helped reinvigorate the plantings. So we've had one called Lacento. Don, what's the name of the producer for the Ruche Lacento? Will come Montebera. That will make you think a little bit of a savory Pinot Noir. And it's not particularly expensive, but again, it would be, if you like these wines, I think you would like that one. Any other suggestions you think about from Italy, Don, that people shouldn't miss? How about Radicchio, if you're a white wine drinker? In the Marche, which is on the east coast of Italy, about halfway down, they make a wine called either Radicchio de Castelli Gesù, I think it is, or de Metallica. Those are the two appellations. And those are both really delicious. They're kind of soft and round. The flavors, again, they're not really fruity wines. They tend to taste a little nutty. They have a little bit of a saline tone. They're mineral. Maybe there's a little lemon in them. But the Radicchios are delicious. Again, not terribly expensive. So if I were going to put something on my list, that's what I would add, those three. Then in terms of wineries, boy, I think that's more a question of what you're finding that you're liking. I wouldn't recommend a lot of the big winery, like Planeta, for example, when you're on Sicily, they're mass producing primarily international grapes. They're perfectly fine wines, but if you're looking for another artisanal producer, we might have put a few names on here. We put Benante on here. So let me think about that, about what I might add. But again, look for some of the smaller producers.
Sure. We have another question here from Michael Breidenbach. This is in general about wine and food pairings. Do wine and food pairings generally work because each one highlights certain flavors in the other, or is it that they just happen to be complementary, or is it both?
Boy, that's a hard question, and people have wrestled with something like that for a long time. I think there are some basic rules that people think about. For example, if you're eating a sweet food, you need a wine with some sweetness in it to balance each other. If you're eating a food that has a lot of fat, like a steak or a hamburger, then it's good to have a wine with considerable tannin, because the tannin the fat kind of cuts through some of the tannin, and those go well together. I think that the perfect pairing is one in which the wine and the food taste better together than they do by themselves. So I think the focaccia tonight, if you had that clear milk, the ricotta with the honey on the focaccia with the Pietrorizzo, I think that would be one of those, what we call 1 + 1 = 3 moments. So some of it is flavor, some of it is weight, some of it is balancing the acidity or a little bit of sweetness you just find out by experiment what you like together. Okay, anything else in here that we need to, I see quite a few chats. Do any of the Italian vineyards add spirit flavors in the battle? Like I've seen lots of bourbon barrels. Now, what do you think about the spirit flavoring? That's a really interesting question. I have not come across people in Italy making wines using used bourbon barrels. They do that in the sherry region. They buy the Scotch barrels, for example, and they make sherries with those. So there is one wine from the Piedmont that it's fortified, which means it's had some spirit added to it, and it has a lot of herbal flavors added. It's called Barolo Chinato, C-H-I-N-A-T-O. And that's sort of a slightly sweeter wine, but not super sweet, that has lots of herbal and interesting flavors. And you could try that with some chocolate, for example, if you wanted to try wine that's really different. Okay. How are we doing? Any other questions? I'm going to make sure I didn't miss anyone's questions. Let's see. Maybe not. Okay. Anybody want to add anything or say anything that we didn't talk about? Ask any questions that we didn't answer? Okay.
Lisa,
Well, yes.
I'd be interested in knowing who's on the call. Do we have people from California? Where are other people other than Hilton Head?
So you can put in the upper right-hand corner under view, you can make a grid.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the bottom of your grid, you could push a sideways arrow and you can see that. But why don't we've got people from California, we've got people from all over. How about if everybody from Massachusetts puts up their hand right now and says hello, because there are a lot of people there. Yeah, look at that. Okay, a lot of people from Massachusetts. I think, how about California? Let's see you guys next. I know we've got a few people from California. Hey, I see Christina Clark. She's from St. Louis. Okay. And Dan LaPresti, I think, is another graduate alum. And aren't you from Pennsylvania, Dan?
Yes.
Okay. So
That's right, Pennsylvania.
Well, Lisa, I think this is fantastic.
Yeah.
I really want to congratulate you and Princeton for doing this.
Super job.
Thank you, Susan. Susan's husband, Scott, was the one who founded the club and came up with the great idea for the cane. So we want to make sure we give her a locomotive. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, Lisa, on behalf of...
So,
Thank you.
what, Don?
The New Yorkers?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I didn't ask the New Yorkers to put up their hands. So sorry. All right, you're there. Here you are.
Awesome.
All right, lots of you. That's great. So, a couple things I do want to end by thanking. First of all, I want to thank Grace Harrison, who might be on our call. She very kindly organized the Lux Wine Distribution Center to make the wine available for us, which was wonderful, because one of the things with the tasting this large is how do we find this much wine and get it shipped to everybody? So it wasn't, it wouldn't have been possible without her. I also want to thank, we just talked about all the clubs, thank the people from New York, from New England, from Northern California, all of you for joining together and for inviting us, because you started this and we're so pleased that we could join you, and it's been a lot of fun. Okay, so I think maybe it's anything else, Cindy? Yes, Cindy, do you have
I just thought this might be a great moment to get our Zoom compilation photo where everyone smiles
yes.
to the camera.
Yeah, we've had a request for that. Hang on, let me, do I have to exit this view?
I can see everyone, so it's fine.
You can see everybody. Okay, gallery. So if everybody
So-
smiles, that would be wonderful to have this picture.
Yes. So we'll say 1, 2, 3, tiger cheers, and I'll take the picture. Okay, 1, 2, 3, tiger cheers. All right.
Thanks, Cindy. And then I think we also, we've got Old Nassau ready to go. We have a Katzenjammer recording.
We
so
do.
we can all enjoy. So thank you all again. Oh, one quick thing before we go to Old Nassau. Next up for the Princeton Club in Hilton Head, anyone who would like to is invited. Don and I have a book coming out on the biotech industry, from breakthrough to blockbuster. And on Wednesday, March 9th, I think it is, we're going to do a virtual, we'll send a free excerpt from the book. You don't have to buy it. You don't even have to read the excerpt. And we're going to talk a little bit about how the biotech industry defeated the pharma industry and produced most of the wonderful new medicines that the world needs so much. So that's the main theme of that book. And we're happy to share it all with you on March 9th. And we'll get an invitation out.
Great.
Yay.
Lisa, before we go to Old Nassau, can I just say a quick word?
Of course.
First of all, we've been doing a running series of wine tastings, and I know Steph, who had to go from Northern California, is organizing one we think will be on April 6th with Miramar Vineyards in Sonoma, Princeton-owned vineyards. So keep your calendars, save the date for that. Everyone is, of course, most welcome. But most importantly, before we go to Old Nassau, on behalf of Steph and Raquel and all of the other Princeton clubs who collaborated here, I want to thank Lisa. Lisa, you are so knowledgeable.
Amazing.
And your enthusiasm and the information and your level of knowledge is incredibly It's amazing, and it draws us all in. So thank you for organizing this, for all the work you did planning, for all the time you spent tasting Barolos, and for all of the handout you did with all the food pairing information and all the background information. It was a lovely evening, and we all want to just give you a large round of thank you. So thank you for a great evening.
Oh, well, thank you for that. You know, Don and I studied for a long time. We have what are called diplomas from the Wine and Spirits Education Trust. It took us a couple of years to do that. We're just so happy that we can use it. So thank you all for coming.